The elegant chandeliers of Le Blanc cast a warm glow over the pristine white tablecloths as Mai adjusted her slightly worn black apron. At 24, she wasn't where she had imagined she would be. Not after graduating from one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. But life had a way of throwing unexpected curves, and here she was, balancing plates instead of playing piano keys. "Table 7 needs their wine topped up," called out Roger, the head waiter, as he hurried past with a tray of appetizers. May nodded, reaching for the bottle of expensive Bordeaux. Her fingers, once accustomed to dancing across piano keys, now wrapped around the neck of wine bottles with practiced ease. Each time she poured, she couldn't help but notice how her customers barely acknowledged her presence, as if she were just another piece of the restaurant's furniture. The weight of her father's medical bills pressed heavily on her shoulders. 6 months ago, he had collapsed in the middle of teaching his high school math class. The diagnosis came like a thunderbolt. A rare heart condition requiring extensive treatment. Their modest savings, originally set aside for May's concert career, vanished into a stack of hospital invoices. As she moved between tables, May caught fragments of conversations about stock portfolios, yacht parties, and weekend getaways to the Hamptons. A familiar melody drifted from the restaurant's sound system, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Her hands twitched slightly, muscle memory trying to play along with the invisible keys. "Miss, miss," a sharp voice cut through her thoughts. A woman in a designer dress was holding up an empty glass, her red lips pursed in annoyance. "I've been trying to get your attention for ages. Do try to stay focused." Mai apologized softly, reaching for the wine bottle. As she poured, her mind wandered to the grand piano sitting in the corner of the restaurant. It was usually played by Mr. Kim, their regular pianist, but he had called in sick today. The instrument stood there, silent and gleaming, like a friend waiting to share a secret. Between serving courses and clearing plates, May would steal glances at the piano. Each time she passed it, she felt a pull, like a magnet drawing her closer. She remembered her last performance, 3 years ago, at her graduation recital. The thunder of applause, the weight of the roses thrown onto the stage, the pride in her father's eyes as he watched his daughter living out their shared dream. Now, her only audience was the mirror in her tiny apartment, where she practiced silently on a paper keyboard she had drawn herself. She couldn't afford a real piano, not with the medical bills and rent eating away at her waitress's salary. But she kept her fingers nimble, refusing to let her skills rust away completely. "Your section has a private party coming in later," Roger informed her during their brief break. "Some big-shot tech entrepreneur and his friends. Make sure everything's perfect. These people tip well if they're happy." He paused, then added more gently, "And try not to look so sad when you're serving. I know it's tough, but customers come here for the experience." May nodded, straightening her shoulders. She had learned to wear a mask of pleasant detachment, to smile and nod at the right moments, to be invisible yet efficient. But deep inside, the music never stopped playing. Even as she memorized wine lists and daily specials, her mind kept time with silent symphonies. As the evening crowd began to fill the restaurant, Mai took a deep breath, readying herself for the rush. The private party would be arriving soon, and with them, another night of serving those who had what she had lost. Yet somehow, despite everything, her heart held onto a quiet hope. Maybe someday she would find her way back to music. Until then, she would keep playing her silent songs, carrying her dreams like precious secrets beneath her waitress's uniform. The private party arrived exactly at 8, filling the reserved section with expensive perfumes and loud laughter. Mai watched from the service station as Roger welcomed them, leading the group to their elaborately decorated tables. At the center of the gathering was Mr. Wu, the tech entrepreneur whose face often graced business magazines. He seemed quieter than his companions, offering a small smile as he took his seat. "Remember, these are VIP guests," whispered Lin, another waitress, as she arranged wine glasses on her tray. Mr. Wu just sold his company for millions. The manager says we can't make any mistakes tonight. May's section was closest to the grand piano, which sat untouched in its corner, its polished surface reflecting the chandelier light. As she approached the party with water pitchers, snippets of conversation floated around her. "Can you believe this place still has a piano? So old-fashioned," remarked a woman in a sparkly dress, her diamond earrings catching the light. "Nobody appreciates classical music anymore." "Speaking of appreciation," added another guest, swirling his wine glass, "did you see the waitress's shoes? They're practically falling apart." Heat crept up May's neck as she pretended not to hear, focusing instead on filling water glasses without spilling a drop. Her shoes were worn, yes, but they were all she could afford after paying this month's hospital bills. Yesterday, she had carefully glued the separating sole back together. The evening progressed like a perfectly choreographed dance of awkward moments. Every time May approached the table, someone would make a comment just loud enough for her to hear. About her hair, her posture, her accent when she recited the specials. Mr. Wu remained quiet during these exchanges, occasionally glancing at his phone or out the window. "I heard the owner hired staff from the local community to appear more inclusive," stage whispered one man in an expensive suit. "How charitable of them." May's hands trembled slightly as she served the main course, but she kept her face neutral. Years of performance training had taught her something about wearing masks. She thought of her father, who always said dignity was worth more than gold. Even now, in his hospital bed, he maintained that gentle wisdom that had guided her childhood. The breaking point came during dessert. A woman in red lifted her hand to get May's attention, accidentally on purpose, knocking over a full glass of red wine. The liquid spread across the white tablecloth like spilled blood, drops splattering onto May's uniform. "Oh my, how clumsy of you," the woman said, her voice dripping with false concern. "You should really be more careful when clearing the tables. Perhaps this isn't the right job for someone like you." The room seemed to freeze. May stood there, wine seeping into her white shirt, feeling the weight of every eye on her. Even the usual restaurant chatter had died down. Mr. Wu finally looked up from his phone, his expression unreadable. "I'll get something to clean this up," May managed to say, her voice steady despite the storm inside her chest. As she turned to leave, she heard the woman continue, "These people should stick to what they're good at. Not everyone is meant for better things." In the kitchen, Mai pressed her palms against the cool metal prep table, taking deep breaths. The wine had left a large stain, and this was her only clean uniform shirt. She had another shift tomorrow morning. "Take 5 minutes," Roger told her kindly, touching her shoulder. "I'll handle their table until you're ready." May nodded gratefully. Her eyes drifted through the kitchen door to the piano, still sitting there in its corner. The sheet music left open from Mr. Kim's last performance seemed to call to her. After nearly 3 years of silence, after all the humiliation of tonight, something inside her was ready to break free. As the party began to wind down, with several guests already calling for their cars, May made a decision. She had spent so long being invisible, being what others expected her to be. But tonight, something would change. She didn't know it yet, but the next few minutes would transform not just her life, but the lives of everyone still in that restaurant. The restaurant had quieted down, with only a handful of guests remaining from the private party. Most were in the lobby, waiting for their cars. The wine stain on May's uniform had dried into a dark red patch, but she barely noticed it anymore. Her attention was fixed on the grand piano, its lid still open from Mr. Kim's last performance. The cleaning staff had begun their nightly routine, the soft clink of dishes and whisper of brooms creating a gentle backdrop. May's shift was technically over. She had already changed out of her wine-stained shirt into her spare blouse. She should have been heading home. Instead, her feet carried her toward the piano. Her fingers trembled as she touched the smooth wooden surface. How many times had she walked past this instrument, pretending it didn't call to her? How many silent symphonies had she played in her mind while serving plates and pouring wine? "You should go home, May," Roger called softly from across the room. "It's been a rough night." But May wasn't listening. She was remembering her father's words from their last hospital visit. "Life is too short for silence," he had said, looking smaller than ever in his hospital bed. "When music lives in your heart, keeping it locked away is like trying not to breathe." Without really deciding to, she found herself sitting on the piano bench. The keys felt cool under her fingertips, familiar, like greeting an old friend. She could hear movement in the lobby, voices of the remaining party guests. Mr. Wu was probably still settling the bill. May closed her eyes and began to play. She chose Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, not the gentle first movement that everyone knew, but the stormy third movement that matched the turbulence in her heart. Her fingers flew across the keys, years of practice flowing through her like electricity. The cleaning sounds stopped. The lobby voices quieted. The whole restaurant seemed to hold its breath as the music filled every corner, every shadow. Mai poured everything into the keys, her frustration, her dreams, her love for her father, her determination to hold onto dignity no matter what. The piece was technically demanding, requiring intense concentration and skill. But for Mai, it felt as natural as breathing. Each note was a word in a story she had kept silent for too long. The piano sang under her touch, its voice strong and clear, reaching even the farthest corners of the restaurant. Through her closed eyes, she sensed movement around her. The remaining kitchen staff had emerged to listen. A few guests who had been heading out stopped in their tracks. Even the night manager, who usually frowned on any deviation from routine, stood transfixed. As the final movement reached its climax, May's whole body moved with the music. Her hands danced across the keys in perfectly controlled chaos, building to a crescendo that seemed to shake the very air. When the final notes thundered through the restaurant, the silence that followed was electric. Mai opened her eyes slowly, reality seeping back in. Her heart was pounding, her breath coming in quick gasps. She became aware of wetness on her cheeks. She had been crying without realizing it. Then she heard it, a single pair of hands clapping. She turned to find Mr. Wu standing in the doorway, his eyes wide with amazement. Behind him, his remaining party guests stood frozen, their expressions a mixture of shock and disbelief. The woman who had spilled the wine had her hand over her mouth. More applause joined in, the kitchen staff, the cleaning crew, the other customers who had stayed to listen. The sound filled the restaurant, echoing off the walls just as the music had moments before. "I don't understand," said the woman in red, her voice small and confused. "You're just a—" But she couldn't finish the sentence. The word waitress hung unspoken in the air, its meaning transformed by what they had just witnessed. Mai sat very still at the piano, her hands still resting on the keys, feeling as if she had just woken from a dream, or perhaps into one. Mr. Wu stepped forward, his expression no longer distant but intensely focused. For the first time that evening, he looked directly at Mai, seeing not a server but a fellow artist. The next words he would speak would change everything, but for now, the music still hung in the air, a testament to dreams that refused to die. The applause finally died down, leaving a charged silence in its wake. Mr. Wu walked slowly toward the piano, his expensive shoes clicking against the polished floor. The restaurant staff held their breath, unsure what would happen next. Even Roger, usually quick with a solution to any situation, stood motionless by the service station. "That was Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, third movement," Mr. Wu said softly, his voice carrying in the quiet room. "One of the most challenging pieces in the classical repertoire." He stopped a few feet from the piano bench, studying May with new eyes. "Where did you learn to play like that?" May's hands were still trembling slightly as she folded them in her lap. I studied at the music conservatory, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Before. Before what? The question came from the woman in red, who had moved closer, her earlier arrogance replaced by genuine curiosity. Mai took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders. Before my father got sick. He's a teacher, was a teacher. He had a heart attack in his classroom 6 months ago. The medical bills. She trailed off, not wanting to sound like she was asking for sympathy. Mr. Wu nodded slowly, as if pieces of a puzzle were falling into place. And now you're here, serving wine instead of performing concerts. It wasn't a question, but his tone held no judgment, only understanding. The restaurant needed servers, May said simply, and we needed the money. She stood up from the piano bench, suddenly aware that everyone was still watching her. I should help with the closing duties. Wait. Mr. Wu held up his hand. Please, play something else for us. Mai glanced at the night manager, who gave a slight nod. Settling back onto the bench, she chose a piece she had played countless times in practice rooms at the conservatory. Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. As her fingers touched the keys, the world around her faded again. This time, she played with her eyes open, watching as emotions played across the faces of her audience. The woman in red dabbed at her eyes with an expensive handkerchief. 2 kitchen helpers stood in the doorway, their cleaning forgotten. Mr. Wu had closed his eyes, swaying slightly with the music. When the final notes faded away, no one moved for several seconds. Then Mr. Wu opened his eyes, and May saw they were glistening with unshed tears. I owe you an apology, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I sat here all evening, watching my friends treat you poorly, and I said nothing. I was distracted. My company just launched a new music education platform, and I've been worried about its direction. We're trying to make classical music accessible to everyone, but something's been missing. He gestured toward the piano. This raw passion, this pure talent, this is what we need. The remaining party guests shifted uncomfortably, some looking at their shoes, others pretending to check their phones. The woman in red stepped forward, clutching her designer purse like a shield. I'm sorry too, she stammered. About the wine, and what I said. I didn't know. That waitresses could play piano. May finished for her, but without bitterness. The music had washed away her anger, leaving only a calm certainty in its wake. That anyone could play like that, the woman corrected quietly. Mr. Wu was still watching May intently. How many other talents are hidden in plain sight? He wondered aloud. How many dreams are put on hold because of circumstances beyond control? He pulled out his business card, turning it over to write something on the back. I'd like to talk to you about an opportunity. But first, tell me about your father. What hospital is he in? Mai felt her throat tighten. Could this evening, which had started so horribly, really be turning into something else entirely? She looked at the grand piano, its keys still warm from her touch, then back at Mr. Wu's earnest expression. Sometimes, she realized, life's hardest moments are just preludes to its greatest movements. Like a complex piece of music, you have to play through the difficult parts to reach the beautiful resolution waiting on the other side. The next morning found May sitting in a gleaming office building 40 floors above the city streets. The receptionist had led her to a waiting area with floor-to-ceiling windows, where she now perched nervously on the edge of a leather chair. Her waitress uniform was replaced by her best outfit, a simple blue dress she had worn to her conservatory graduation. Just 12 hours ago, she had been serving drinks and enduring snide comments. Now here she was, waiting to meet with one of the city's most successful tech entrepreneurs. The events of last night still felt like a dream. May, a friendly voice called. She looked up to see Mr. Wu walking toward her, dressed more casually than he had been at the restaurant. Thank you for coming. Please follow me. He led her through an open office space where young professionals worked at sleek desks. To her surprise, They passed several music rooms with instruments and recording equipment. Through one glass wall, she saw someone wearing headphones, conducting an online music lesson. Mr. Wu's office was smaller than she had expected, with a digital piano tucked into one corner. Family photos lined his desk, and a worn music theory book sat open nearby. "My mother was a piano teacher," he explained, catching her glance at the book. "She taught in our living room for 30 years, charging whatever families could afford. Sometimes that meant accepting payment in home-cooked meals or handmade gifts." He smiled at the memory. "She always said music shouldn't be just for the wealthy." May thought of her own father, who had worked extra tutoring jobs to pay for her piano lessons. "She sounds like a wonderful person." She was. Mr. Wu's expression grew serious. "That's partly why I started this company. We're developing an app that makes music education accessible to everyone, regardless of their background. But something's been missing." He pressed a key on his laptop, and a video began playing on the wall screen. Mai watched as different people appeared. Children practicing violin in cramped apartments, elderly folks learning piano in community centers, teenagers composing music on tablets. "These are our current users," Mr. Wu explained. "But we need someone who understands both worlds, the classical training and the real-life struggles. Someone who can help us bridge that gap." He turned to face her directly. "I spoke with the hospital this morning. Your father's medical bills have been taken care of." May's hand flew to her mouth. "What? But how?" "Consider it an investment in both your futures." He held up a hand as tears welled in her eyes. "This isn't charity, May. I want to offer you a job. 2 jobs, actually. First, as our lead musical consultant, helping develop our educational programs. Second," he smiled, "as a performer." "I don't understand," May whispered. "We host monthly concerts, live streamed to our users worldwide. Real musicians sharing real stories. Your story, May, from the conservatory to waiting tables to never giving up on your dream. That's exactly what people need to hear. Along with your incredible talent, of course." The salary he mentioned made her fingers grip the chair arms. It was more than she'd make in a year at the restaurant. But something held her back. "The woman in red from last night," Mr. Wu continued, noting her hesitation. "She's on our board of directors. This morning, she insisted we start a scholarship program for young musicians facing financial hardships. Your performance changed something in her, in all of us." May stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city sprawled below. Somewhere down there, her father was in his hospital bed, probably solving crossword puzzles and charming the nurses. Somewhere down there was the restaurant where she'd spent months hiding her talent. And somewhere down there, other dreamers were putting their passions on hold, thinking they had no choice. "There's one condition," she said finally, turning back to Mr. Wu. His eyebrows rose in surprise. "I want to keep working at the restaurant. 1 shift a week." "May I ask why?" "To remind myself where I came from." And she smiled for the first time that morning, to play for the customers. Every shift. No more silent piano. Mr. Wu broke into a grin. "I think we can arrange that." He extended his hand. "Welcome aboard, May." As they shook hands, sunlight streamed through the windows, painting the office in warm gold. Sometimes, May realized, the hardest part of achieving your dreams isn't the struggle to reach them. It's finding the courage to accept help when it finally arrives. 2 months into her new job, May sat in front of 3 computer screens, reviewing video submissions from aspiring musicians around the world. Each story touched her heart. A truck driver learning violin during break times, a single mom teaching herself piano alongside her children, a retired mechanic finally pursuing his dream of playing cello. "These are amazing," she said to herself, making notes on each application. The scholarship program she'd helped create had drawn thousands of submissions. Her own story, shared on the company's platform, had sparked something unexpected: hope. A knock on her office door made her look up. The woman in red, now known to May as Mrs. Chen, the board director, stood in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this," Mrs. Chen said, placing 1 cup on May's desk. "The board meeting is in an hour, and I hear you've prepared something special." May nodded, trying to calm her nerves. She'd spent weeks developing a new feature for the music education app, something she wished she'd had during her own struggling days. But presenting to the board was different from playing piano or teaching online lessons. "I keep thinking about that night at the restaurant," Mrs. Chen said softly, sitting down. "How we all judged you without knowing your story. Now I read these applications, and I wonder how many others we pass by every day, never knowing their dreams or talents." Mai took a sip of coffee, remembering her own journey. "That's actually part of what I want to present today. I've been working with a tech team on something new." She turned one of her screens toward Mrs. Chen, showing a prototype of her new project. "We're calling it Symphony of Stories. It's a feature that connects students who can't afford instruments with virtual teaching tools. They can practice anywhere, on paper keyboards, on their phone screens, even in the air. The app tracks their movements and gives feedback." Mrs. Chen leaned forward, intrigued. "Like what you used to do, practicing on your drawn keyboard." "Exactly." May clicked through the demonstration. "But there's more. Users can connect with others in similar situations. A delivery worker in one city can practice with a home care nurse in another. They support each other, share tips, celebrate small victories." Her eyes lit up as she continued, "And once a month, we organize local meetups where they can use real instruments. I've already talked to music schools willing to open their practice rooms during off hours." The older woman watched the demonstration, her expression thoughtful. "You're not just teaching music, are you? You're building a community." "Music saved my life twice," May replied. "First, when my mother died, and my father taught me piano to help with the grief. Then again at the restaurant, when playing helped me keep my dignity. Everyone deserves that chance." Just then, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from the hospital. A photo of her father sitting up in bed, giving a thumbs up. His color was better, and he was smiling. The new treatment was working. "He's coming home next week," May said, showing Mrs. Chen the photo. "The doctors said he can even return to teaching soon, part-time." Mrs. Chen squeezed her hand. "You'll play for him." "Every day." May smiled, then glanced at the clock. "I should get ready for the board meeting." As she gathered her presentation materials, May caught her reflection in the window. She was wearing a professional outfit now, but she kept her Waitress name tagged in her desk drawer. Every Thursday evening, she still worked her shift at the restaurant, playing piano between serving tables. The customers loved it, and more importantly, it reminded her that every dream deserved a chance to be heard. Walking toward the boardroom, Mai felt a new kind of confidence. This wasn't just about music anymore. It was about dignity, opportunity, and the power of being seen for who you really are. Her fingers tingled with the familiar pre-performance excitement. But this time, they wouldn't play piano keys. They would help open doors for others like her. The board members were already gathering, their chatter dying down as she entered. Mr. Wu gave her an encouraging nod from his seat. Mai took a deep breath, remembering what her father always said. Life's greatest performances aren't always on stage. 1 year later, the concert hall buzzed with anticipation. Every seat was filled, and screens had been set up in the lobby for the overflow crowd. But it wasn't just the physical audience that mattered. Millions were watching online, many of them students from May's digital music program. Backstage, May smoothed her concert dress, a simple black gown that caught the light just so. Her father stood beside her, looking healthy and proud in his best suit. He had returned to teaching 6 months ago, his heart condition finally under control. "Ready?" he asked, squeezing her hand. May nodded, peeking through the curtain. In the front row, she spotted Mr. Wu and Mrs. Chen. Behind them sat Roger and Lin from the restaurant, both beaming with pride. The rest of the audience was a mix of faces she knew from different parts of her journey. Students from her online classes, fellow musicians, even some regular customers from her Thursday night restaurant performances. But what made this concert truly special wasn't just the size of the audience or the prestigious venue. It was what it represented. This wasn't simply a classical piano recital. It was a celebration of dreams refused to die. As she walked onto the stage, the applause washed over her like a warm wave. She bowed, then settled at the grand piano. Before touching the keys, she spoke into the microphone, her voice clear and steady. A year ago, I was serving tables and hiding my passion for music. Today, I've seen thousands of others find their voice through our program. This concert is for everyone who's ever had to put their dreams on hold. The night shift workers practicing in parking lots, the parents learning alongside their children, the dreamers who never gave up. She paused, letting her words sink in. Tonight's performance will be streamed live in community centers, hospitals, and schools across the country. Every ticket sold has helped fund scholarships for aspiring musicians. But more importantly, every note I play is a reminder that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be. Her fingers touched the keys, and the first notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 filled the hall. This was the piece she'd always dreamed of performing, its powerful emotions matching her own journey perfectly. As she played, images appeared on the screen behind her, photos and videos of students from her program. A bus driver practicing keyboard between routes. A nurse playing violin in the hospital break room. A grandfather learning piano alongside his granddaughter. Each image told a story of persistence, of dreams refusing to die. In the middle of the concert, Mai switched to a piece she had composed herself, titled The Waitress's Symphony. The melody carried echoes of that fateful night at the restaurant, transforming the pain of humiliation into something beautiful. When she reached the triumphant finale, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. For her final piece, she invited someone special to join her, a young girl from her program who had been practicing on a paper keyboard for months before finally getting a real piano. Together, they played a simple duet, their 4 hands moving in perfect harmony. The girl's face shone with joy, and May saw in her eyes the same passion that had kept her own dreams alive during the darkest times. As the last notes faded away, the audience erupted in thunderous applause. May stood and bowed, tears streaming down her face. In that moment, she wasn't thinking about the critics' reviews or the prestigious venue. She was thinking about the restaurant piano, about paper keyboards, about dreams that refused to stay silent. Later that night, after the standing ovations and congratulations, May returned to the restaurant. Still in her concert gown, she sat at the familiar piano in the corner. The late-night staff gathered around as she played one last piece, the same Beethoven sonata that had changed her life a year ago. Some people said I was crazy to keep my Thursday night shift here, she told them, her fingers dancing over the keys. But this piano, this place, it's where I found my voice again. Sometimes the most important audiences are the ones you serve dinner to. As she played, her music drifted out into the night, a reminder that every dream deserves a chance to be heard, and every heart has a melody waiting to be played.